So let me give you 7 thoughts on screening. And by the way, when I wrote the book, I didn't just look at cancer screening. I looked at things like depression screening, screening for Alzheimer's disease, screening for low T. Have you heard of this before? So low T is low testosterone. And there is what they call a self-screening test. I have a chapter about this in my book as well, where you can go online and you can answer these 10 questions. And it's basically questions about, and it's directed towards men who are 45 and older. Because as you get older and you're male, your testosterone level drops. It drops about 1% a year. So you have less stamina and less energy than you used to. And these questions will be something like, do you often feel like you don't have as much stamina as you used to, or you can't play sports as well as you used to, or maybe you're just not as interested in sex as you used to be? And you look at this list as a 50-year-old guy, you go, yep, yep, yep. And guess what? If you answered 3 yeses in this 10-point questionnaire, then you should go and check your doctor, because you might have low testosterone. And low testosterone, I can tell you, when they tell you to go see your doctor, it's because the pharmaceutical industry has already been to see your doctor, and they've instructed your doctor that when your male patients come in complaining about their lack of stamina, or the fact that they're really not that interested in sex anymore, or they can't play sports as well as they used to, then they deserve to be offered hormone. Well, it's a type of hormone replacement. There's andropause therapy. This is testosterone, and this is a drug that when I looked at this, I was kind of shocked, because a lot of drugs, when you take, they only affect you, right? But testosterone comes in a cream, and you spread it on your chest, right, and your arms, and it's transdermal. It goes into your skin, and that's how it's released into the body. The warnings, and I'm talking about U.S. FDA warnings on testosterone replacement therapy, is basically don't play with your children, and don't hug your partner. If you have a female partner, you shouldn't give them a hug if you've got this on your chest, because you can cause androgenization. In fact, when they have found that children who have been exposed to testosterone in the cream develop sexually much earlier. So, and this is not Alan Cassels making this up. This is the U.S. FDA telling you, be very careful with this drug. Anyways, so main thoughts on screening. I have maybe 7 of them. So, overdiagnosis is a problem that I've identified, and it happens everywhere. You can be overdiagnosed for having low testosterone. You can be overdiagnosed for having depression when you don't, or signs of hypertension or high cholesterol. And this problem of overdiagnosis is becoming increasingly recognized by people who study the science behind screening. They're saying, we are causing a huge amount of overdiagnosis in people, and we should stop doing it. And the economics. So this quote from Gary Schweitzer, who's a colleague of mine, and he has a website, by the way, called healthnewsreview.org. And I would say that, and this is my bias here, I do reviews for these guys. I've written blogs for them before. They analyze how the media treats medical and healthcare topics. And he said that screening outside the boundaries of evidence could bankrupt the nation in a heartbeat. And that is so true, is that so much of the screening that gets promoted to people on the promises that it's going to save their lives, sometimes that screening is paid for by insurers. That affects your premiums and your health insurance costs. And if we were to allow any screening test that anyone wanted to launch onto the market, we would be bankrupt in a moment. Pseudodisease. So one of the axioms that's used to sell screening, and frankly to sell a lot of healthcare, is better safe than sorry. Wouldn't you rather be safe and have a screening test, or be sorry when it becomes too late? Well, so the problem is that the tests, the medications, the procedures, even the surgical procedures, they all have inherent risks, right? I said in my book, instead of saying better safe than sorry, I think the more appropriate axiom is look before you leap. Educate yourself about about screening before you go into it. Part of the reason why I wrote the book and why I think that people need to go into screening with their eyes wide open. Sometimes very interesting and unusual research jumps out at me. And this was related to the natural history of breast cancer. So the question is, if you find breast cancer, signs of breast cancer in women, does that mean that they're automatically going to go on, develop breast cancer, and it will spread to the rest of their body, and they will die? No. That does happen. Granted, breast cancer is still a major form of cancer death in women, though some cancers, believe it or not, disappear. When I say they disappear, it's not the cancer that's disappearing, it's the sign that disappears. And when the Norwegians studied this, basically spontaneous regression, they found, and they tracked women over several years, and they found that women in whom they found some anomaly, they did nothing. And they followed those women, and they found that when they tested them several years later, 2 or 3 years later, they found that the cancer spontaneously regressed. So I want to quote this guy. Mammography screening detects a lot of subclinical cancers that will never become clinical, which means it will never go on to hurt you. But the problem is, can you find something and do nothing about it? Really? I mean, in PSA screening, a lot of men will be told, well, we found an unusually high level of your PSA, we've done a biopsy, there's evidence of prostate cancer, now what do you want to do? And the guy will say, well, get it out. But of course, he's believing that cancer will go on to kill him. He's not told that, most men in your situation, if they leave it well enough alone, they're going to die of something when they're in their old age. That cancer will not go on. Now, of course, there's this thing called watchful waiting. The question is, a lot of people, when they find something unusual, they can't do nothing. You can't unknow it, and that's the problem. If I give your child a test and it comes back saying that your child has attention deficit disorder, that diagnosis is going to ride that kid for the rest of his life. So when you're doing this test, and the tests have faults with them, when you're doing these tests, you have to be very careful of the downstream consequences, because if you impose a diagnosis on someone that isn't true, or sticks them in a box, you are giving them a burden that they probably don't deserve. That's one of the reasons why I'm really opposed to any form of mental health screening, is that, again, mental health screening, we'll say depression screening. You may be surprised to know that one of the major screening tools for depression is this PH9, can't remember what it's called. It's the major test that they determine whether the person might be diagnosed with depression. And it's copyright by Pfizer. Pfizer is a major pharmaceutical company, if you don't know. And you say, how could that be? How could we allow a major pharmaceutical company to develop one of the essential screening tools for depression? Well, Pfizer makes Zoloft. Zoloft is a big antidepressant. So if you can develop a screening tool that's wide enough to capture more and more people, you're going to have more patients. You're going to have more customers. I'm not making it up that the pharmaceutical industry is involved in many types of development of screening tools. So we're also easily fooled, okay? There's lots of hope, there's lots of hype around screening. So this survey by Gregenzer and Gray, very fascinating. So they surveyed 10,000 Europeans, and they found that almost 90% of men, they overestimate the benefits of PSA testing. And over 90% of women also overestimate the benefits. So when you ask them, well, how much do you think it will help? They sometimes estimate the benefits to be 10 times and sometimes 100 times more than it actually is. So this is a really important point whenever you're faced with a screening test, is to know how much benefit am I likely to achieve from this test? Because getting the actual numbers is really important. And I go into this in a fair bit of detail. But so the other question is informed consent. And this is something that fascinates me, is sometimes you can be given a screening test and not even know it. I say, well, how does that happen? Well, just imagine you've got a 50-year-old guy. He goes in for his annual physical. Doctor says, I'm going to send you for some blood work. Take some blood. He goes to the lab, and there's a sheet there that tells him which test to do on the blood. We'll check for his hemoglobin A1C, his cholesterol, check, PSA, check, so on. They're just taking blood, and they're running it through machines to see what. So then 2 weeks later, the guy gets a call from the doctor and says, I want you to come in. There's a concerning result from your test. And the doctor says, he said, Samuel, just hold on to yourself. This is probably not a problem, but you probably have prostate cancer. And the guy goes, what do you mean? Like, how did you test me for prostate cancer? Oh, remember that blood test I sent you for 2 weeks ago? Yeah, I checked the box where you. So suddenly, the person's life is completely changed from the doctor ticking the box to get a PSA test. The question of informed consent, I think, is very important and really underestimated in the medical world. A lot of people say, well, we'll do whatever you say, doctor. You know best. And sometimes that's right. Sometimes that's dead wrong, especially when you're being offered a screening test that could radically alter your life, and you weren't even told in advance that you're getting the screening test. Wow. Now, if you are told that you're getting a screening test, a woman getting a mammogram, you can't spring that on her. It takes planning, and it takes some level of activity. But what is the woman told beforehand, before she gets her mammography? Is she told that there's a fairly high rate of overdiagnosis? That if they find something, there's a more than 80% chance it's going to be an anomaly that will never go on to hurt her? Is she given the straight goods? And frankly, since mammography has been so much studied and so much in the news, there are some very good patient-oriented information that explains mammography and the benefits and the risks to consumers. But you know what? When I've read the stuff that's available, say through the American Cancer Society, that stuff is not informative at all. You don't get any sense of whether there's a level of benefit or risk to it. It's completely uninformative. So screening involves harm, and it also involves risks, and it also involves cost. So the other thing, too, is that it's very, very hard to unadopt screening. Once you've started a screening program, whether it's for prostate cancer screening, lung cancer screening, colon cancer screening, once you have those programs in place and you have physicians who are telling their patients, you have to get a colonoscopy or you have to have a fecal occult blood test. Once they start doing that and research emerges over time that, we're causing a level of overdiagnosis, we're harming people by the test, you try to bring that back, you try to wind that back, and it's very hard to unadopt a screening test. Why? Well, some people think, we just need a newer test. We just need a better test. And that might be true. And I think there are newer and probably better ways to test for breast cancer anyways. But once you have the screening test, try to unadopt it is really difficult. So I say you can't forget the role of Big Pharma in screening for new customers. Now, you say, how involved can pharma really be in the screening world? And I can tell you there is good evidence that they've not only been involved in affecting screening for depression, for bipolar disorder, for attention deficit disorder, for low testosterone. And here's one little bit of evidence. So this is just an ad from a newspaper where the representative from Eli Lilly is giving a check for $500,000 to Screening for Mental Health in support of the organization's annual National Depression Screening Day. Wow. This is, to me, in a picture, a symbol of what is wrong, is that when you allow the pharmaceutical industry to help define what is illness, then you are giving them the power to sell more and more drugs to healthy people. Okay. So I think it's worth examining our beliefs around medical screening, Because we all have very, very, very strong beliefs. And I have had debates with people who have been through mammography testing, who have had the experience of a false positive, have gone on and had surgery, and then come back, and they are the most powerful vocal promoters of breast cancer screening, because they say, it saved my life. Even though the likelihood that it saved your life is very small, people will believe that the PSA test saved their lives. The mammography screen saved their life. Oh, if we didn't take our kid for this screen for attention deficit disorder, that saved his life. Okay? We always believe that if you find something early, it's always better. But we do have lots of proof that sometimes it's worse, and much worse, and life-changing. So screening programs are often, put out there in the public on the basis of this belief and not evidence. And when I was asked, when this book came out and I was asked, I did a couple interviews with various journals, and it was reviewed in a couple of newspapers. And one of the journalists asked me, so of all the screening tests, which one would you do? It was a good question. Which one would I do? And I had to think very deeply, and I said, I think when the evidence looks a little bit better around colon cancer screening, I would consider that one. I think the jury is still out, and of course anybody watching this is going to tell me that their lives have been saved from colon cancer screening because they went in and examined the inside of their intestines with a little scope, and they found polyps, and they removed them, and removing those polyps saved their lives. That's a very strong belief. And that's part of the appeal of colonoscopies, is that they can go in with a little camera and snake their way up through your intestines and look at the quality of your colon. The problem, of course, is that we still don't know whether removing those polyps is actually going to prevent you from developing prostate or colon cancer in the future. We think it will, and that's why I say the evidence is still. But the industry that has built up around colon cancer screening is massive. The money involved is mind-boggling. The need, therefore, to get people to fear death by colon cancer and to go in and do something preventative, like get a colonoscopy, which could cost several thousands of dollars and use up a lot of time of a radiologist to interpret findings and so on, that they can go in, and it's kind of like they go on this little space mission, and they take out the bad guys. I mean, it's very good. It fits with the American myth of going out into the wilderness and doing something really well. It's going to save humanity. So we have a much more exaggerated belief in almost any kind of screening. Lately, I've seen that there has been some recommendations around lung cancer screening. You say, well, wow, that seems like a good thing, because lung cancer actually is a fairly major cause of death. I mean, I think it's probably the leading cause of cancer death in the US, mostly tied to smoking and environmental exposure. So you can be exposed to asbestos, for example, and develop lung cancer. Actually, my uncle died 2 weeks ago from lung cancer. Never smoked in his life. He was an industrial electrician, worked around big plants where they had lots of asbestos, and developed the cancer from that. Lung cancer screening uses CT scans. They used to use X-rays, but more and more they're using CT scans, and they can find all kinds of things in lungs. And when they study lung cancer screening, they have to enroll an awful lot of people. Why is that? Is because the yield is so low. In fact, the big major lung cancer screening trial that was done here in the US, thank you US government for paying for that, it took about 3 or 4 years. They enrolled 53,000 people, and these weren't regular people. These were people which had a 30-pack year history of smoking. And what's that? Well, you smoke a pack a day for 30 years. Those are the patients that they're in the trial. Okay, those patients have sort of exposed themselves to a lot of harmful smoke over the years. How many of those were saved by having lung cancer screening? I can tell you it was so shockingly small, I almost didn't believe the findings. It was, with the mammography, you have to screen 2,000 women for 10 years to prevent one death. With lung cancer screening, to prevent one death of lung cancer screening, you have to screen thousands of people. And thousands and thousands, and not just regular people. We're talking heavy smokers. I mean, these are people that are high risk. But what happens is that the screening test is promoted for high-risk people. Other people might say, well, maybe I would benefit from that too. Let's see. I grew up in a household where my mom and dad smoked. I was exposed to secondhand smoke. Maybe I have a high risk of lung cancer. Maybe I should get the lung cancer screen. Okay. I mean, that's the kind of logic that we go through. Again, very low yield, and a lot of these CT scans will actually increase your subsequent risk of cancer. There was an interesting study a few years ago that was reported in the New York Times, and they estimated that about 2 to 3% of new cancers in the U.S. are caused by excessive use of CT screening. So by an excessive use, that would be screening people for things for which if you're very sick and a CT scan is going to help diagnose you and treat you, there is no problem with that. But if you're taking otherwise healthy people and exposing them to the risk of the radiation of a CT scan, that's a completely different category. So the last thing, people believe that they're getting balanced information. And this is part of the problem. This is part of the reason why I wrote this book, is because there's many, many examples where people are getting very biased information. They're getting information, like my first slide, from companies that are promoting certain products for certain diseases and certain types of screening. So where to go for good information? I think in the last 5 years, ever since my book was published, I'm just kidding, that there has been a sort of explosion of better quality information around screening. Peter Gauthier, who's one of the co-founders of the Cochrane collaboration right there in the middle, he wrote a book called Mammography Screening, Truth, Lies, and Controversy. And I can tell you, this guy is a ferocious advocate for evidence, and he is so anti-mammography screening. He makes me look like, a tame little rabbit. And there's the book I mentioned, The Invasion of the Prostate Snatchers. No more unnecessary biopsies, radical treatment, or loss of sexual potency. And the U.S. Preventive Service Task Force, what's interesting, I noticed this mostly by reading American media and looking at how government bodies are discredited in the media. So you'll get these cancer charities, for example, who are out lobbying Congress, out advertising and promoting their form of screening test, when the independent experts who are paid for by the government are saying you shouldn't do it. You should back off from doing it. And there's always this, you're saying that because you're just a government-funded stooges. Well, I think I would rather trust the government-funded stooge than the cancer charity that is making millions of dollars promoting a vision of screening that is mostly unhelpful for people. So my last little bit of advice is that you have to be careful of reading health books, because you could die of a misprint.